Elena Monroe stood there, her trembling hand clutching the edge of her disheveled cotton dress, her eyes wide as if the entire world had just been torn apart. Her cheeks burned as though she'd been slapped. Her breath came in short gasps, her chest tightening like there was no room left for air. In front of her stood Max Kingston, the spoiled heir who reeked of power, still wearing that smug half-smile, the gold watch on his wrist catching the chandelier light above, as if applauding his cruel little game. "Let's see what the thrift store queen hides underneath his voice," rang out clearly across the luxurious ballroom. For 1 second, the entire hall fell silent, then erupted in laughter. Camera flashes burst through the air, not for ball gowns, but for humiliation. Elena gripped her dress tightly with both hands. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She just stood, frozen, her feet glued to the polished wooden floor, as if moving would make the shame spill out of her body. An influencer turned to her phone, live streaming, "Here's the drama we needed tonight. Welcome to the Hunger Games Charity Gala Edition." A platinum-haired woman cast Elena a pitying glance, then tilted her head and said loudly, "Someone help her out." "Poor thing. That dress is hideous, why show it off?" The laughter roared. Max shrugged, raised his wine glass, and then pretended to accidentally spill it. The deep red liquid splashed across Elena's shoulder, trickling down her white dress, leaving behind a stain, like blood, like disgrace. She flinched slightly, but said nothing. She simply clutched her dress tighter, turned away from the light, her head bowed each step she took across the marble floor, slicing like a blade. Behind her, the laughter, the cameras, the phones, all kept flashing. She could no longer hear people's voices, only the deafening drum of her heartbeat in her ears. And no one in the ballroom realized, in a darkened corner near the entrance, a man had just lowered his phone, his eyes cold as ice, having witnessed everything. And had they known who he was, they might not have dared to laugh. Outside the ballroom, the Mayfair Foundation's gala night carried on as if nothing had gone wrong. The crystal lights shimmered softly like white wine. Model-perfect smiles. Evening gowns painted a picture of a graceful, philanthropic, glamorous America. Everything was exactly where it should be, except for Elena. She sat quietly in a hidden corner backstage, clutching her handbag as if it were the last intact piece of her. Her white cotton dress was blotched with wine stains, like dried blood. The fabric at her side was wrinkled from being yanked. She had tried to smooth her hair, wipe away the smeared makeup, but the spotlight still made her face look pale and exposed. Elena Monroe, a final-year law student at UCLA, had just been selected for an internship at the Mayfair Foundation, a non-profit specializing in legal aid for the vulnerable. It was a golden opportunity to work alongside top attorneys and witness the intersection of law and power in landmark cases. And this gala night was the one time a year when students were allowed into the inner circle to observe how backroom deals, donations, and handshakes determined the fate of thousands. For Eleanor, it had been a dream until 20 minutes ago. Now it felt like an expensive play she hadn't learned the lines for. A fellow intern gently placed a glass of water on the table and whispered, "Do you want to leave?" Elena looked up. She didn't nod, didn't shake her head, just eyes that had nowhere left to hide. She heard vague voices murmuring behind her. "Is that dress from a thrift store? Probably just one of those charity stunts bring in the poor for photo ops. I thought she was bussing tables." At that moment, the loudspeaker crackled to life. Would everyone please move to the main hall for a commemorative photo with the Mayfair Scholarship? Honoree Elena froze. They were calling her name. The honorary scholarship recipient, the one just introduced as a shining example of perseverance. The lights in the ballroom shifted. Cameras panned toward the center. There was no time to hesitate. Elena rose to her feet. Her dress was still damp, hands still shaking, but her steps carried her toward the main hall. No one noticed that in that walk, a girl was forcing herself to exist among people who wished she didn't. Elena stepped out from the shadowed hallway and into the center of the grand hall, where golden light blazed and laughter rolled like waves. Each step felt like walking on shattered glass. She sensed every eye sliding first to her dress, then to her face, before settling on the darkened stain below her waist. No one said a word, but everyone saw it. The crowd had already begun forming two lines to take pictures with the sponsors. In front of them was a black backdrop plastered with logos, Mayfair, CNN, Forbes, and a few luxury brands. A proper photo wall for the elite, but to Elena, it looked more like a guillotine waiting. She was about to step into line when a woman's voice rang out behind her. "Careful with that dress. Is that grape juice?" A shrill burst of laughter, followed, punctuated by camera flashes. Elena stopped, but didn't turn around. She simply drew a long, quiet breath. Miss Monroe, a photographer, called out, whether by accident or with intent, it wasn't clear. "Center position, next to the lead sponsor. Look at camera 2. Elena stepped forward and forced a smile. Standing just to her left was Max Kingston's son, of the chairman of Kingston Holdings, the evening's biggest donor. She stood tall, but her heart was pounding. Max glanced at her. His smile slanted. "Next time go with a darker color. Hide stains better." The camera hadn't snapped yet. Elena had 3 seconds left. Max leaned closer, whispering, "Trash doesn't turn into diamonds just because it's in the spotlight, you know." Click. The photo captured the exact moment Max placed his hand behind Elena, and she subtly leaned away, a motion that might have seemed polite, but in the picture, it looked like a shy, flustered laugh. And someone had filmed it, posted it to their Instagram story with the caption, "Among all the goddesses at the gala, Max still picked the recycled girl, eco love is trending." Within 3 minutes, the clip hit over 40,000 internal views. Within 5, it landed on a Beverly Hills Youth Group's Hot or Not page. Someone nearby muttered, their voice slicing straight down Elena's spine. Guess he felt sorry for her, so let her stand close. No, it's the new charity model, back the girl next door. To seem more humane. Elena stood there, eyes fixed on the camera lens, but her gaze had begun to blur. The camera continued to flash. She stayed still, but her fingers began to clench tightly in her palms, as if without that tension, the image of her would fall apart, right there in the light. And it was in that moment, just when the shoot seemed over, Max unexpectedly lifted a champagne flute from a nearby tray, flashing a smirk full of implication. "Elena, let me toast your prestigious scholarship." Then, with a casual flick, the champagne splashed straight onto the part of her dress that was already soaked. This time, the entire room fell silent. Elena stood frozen. Cold champagne slid down her skin, seeping through the thin white fabric, but the sharpest sting was in her heart, the part of her that had just begun to believe she could endure. And all around her, in perfect synchrony, phones were raised. Cold champagne ran down her thigh, soaking through the white fabric. Elena didn't step back. She didn't raise a hand to wipe it away. She simply stood there, eyes wide open, fingers still gripping the side of her dress, as if holding on to the last shred of her dignity. Max still wore his innocent smile, raising his glass high like he was toasting world peace. Camera flashes continued to blink, but for one rare moment, no one dared say a word. Elena slowly turned toward him. Her face was no longer pale, it was frozen terrifyingly still, as if a sheet of ice had coated her skin. "Are you okay?" someone whispered. Elena didn't answer. She merely raised her hand to remove the name tag pinned to her chest, the badge that read Elena Monroe, Scholar of Justice, UCLA. Without a word, she gently placed it into Max's hand. "Keep it," she said quietly. "After all, it's thanks to you I'm the most memorable person tonight." Max looked stunned. A few people nearby turned their heads. They heard her, but no one dared to speak. Elena took one step back, just enough to be out of the camera frame. Then she pulled her phone from her purse. Her fingers moved across the screen, slow and deliberate. Max squinted. "What are you doing?" "Taking notes," Elena replied, eyes fixed on her screen. "About the boundaries of public harassment when there are witnesses and digital evidence. No shouting, no threats, just a sentence, half like a study session, half like an arrest warrant." She turned to the camera, still live streaming. "If anyone in this room ever thought justice was a luxury, today is a good day to watch where it begins." Cold air swept in through the large doors leading to the balcony. The violin music paused. Someone whispered under their breath, "Is she a law student?" Max gave a forced chuckle, trying to play it off. "It's nothing, I was just joking." Oh, Elena looked up, smiling for the first time, not a joyful smile, but the kind of smile born after crossing the final threshold of humiliation. "Then let me joke back with Clause 2 of the Dignity Protection Act 2023. Seems fair, doesn't it?" A soft round of applause echoed from afar. No one knew who started it, but it spread from a group of photographers to a few seasoned attorneys nearby. Max stepped back. No more photos were being taken, only eyes. Elena bowed her head and neatly folded the dinner napkin on the table, as if what had just happened was a minor mishap in an elegant meal. Then she walked away from the spotlight, leaving behind a wall freshly cracked where the powerful once thought they stood untouchable. Elena didn't look back at Max. She simply walked toward the main doors. Her dress still soaked, hair still disheveled, but her posture straight, her steps cold as wind after a storm. People parted around her. A few took photos of her from behind. No one said a word. Until the revolving glass doors opened. A man walked in, and the sounds around them collapsed, like falling into a silent void. A sharp black suit, a pale grey tie, a tall frame, and each step carried with the precision of an unseen force. He didn't need an introduction, because no one in that room didn't know who he was. Nathaniel Reed, CEO of Reed & Whitmore, the top law firm in America. Also, the enigmatic man who hadn't been linked to anyone romantically for the past 5 years. And tonight, he was walking straight toward Elena. The crowd fell utterly still. Max Kingston froze in place. Elena only turned when she heard his voice, soft and steady. "Elena." She stopped. That man was there at the exact moment she thought no one stood with her. "You," she began, but Nathaniel didn't let her finish. He removed the jacket from his suit and stepped forward gently, placing it over her shoulders, as if to say no gaze, no chill, no whisper in the room had the right to touch her again. Then he turned to the crowd with the calm authority of someone used to commanding silence in courtrooms where no one dared breathe too loudly. "What just happened?" he asked. His voice wasn't raised yet. It carried far enough to make a waiter straighten from across the room. No one responded, until Max blurted out, "It was just a little joke, Mr. Reed." Nathaniel nodded very slowly. Then he turned, placing a light hand on Elena's back, as if asking permission first. "Would you like to leave with me, or would you prefer to handle this your own way?" Elena looked at him. Her gaze no longer stung the way it did earlier. It was now quiet, unwavering. She paused, turned back to face Max for the second time that evening. The first time she had stood trembling, clutching the hem of her dress. This time, her hands were relaxed, Nathaniel's coat draped over her shoulders, and her eyes held no fear, only clarity sharp enough to cut. Max gave a weak smile. His lips curled into a mock confidence, but the twitch in his left cheek betrayed him. His fingers clenched around his wine-glass knuckles, bone white as if letting go would mean losing all balance. Elena took a step closer. "You asked me who I am," her voice still soft, but like a blade sliding through silk. "I'm the woman you just tried to humiliate in front of 500 of the most influential people in America." Max swallowed hard. His smile vanished. His eyes began darting across the room, looking for someone to defend him. But every face had turned away. "I'm also the woman," Elena continued, her eyes never leaving Max's stiffening face, "who, from this moment on, will be legally represented by Reed and Whitmore in the lawsuit filed against you. No need to shout, no need for dramatics, just sharp, precise words like the stones laid down on the path he was about to be dragged across." Nathaniel didn't interrupt. He merely stood beside her, a presence too definitive to require explanation. Max opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came out. Across the room, an influencer was already filming, Elena, lips pressed tight, not daring to speak, but unable to look away. Elena turned slightly. "You like camera flashes, don't you, Max?" she said, no longer looking at him. "Then I hope you'll enjoy them under the courtroom lights." And with that, she walked away. Not fast, not slow. Just like a woman who knew every gaze behind her had now shifted. The entire gala room felt like it had forgotten how to breathe. And Max Kingston still stood there, fingers trembling around an empty glass, like if it shattered he might too. Just hours after the gala, a 47-second clip spread like wildfire. Elena was no longer the girl with the torn dress. She had become a symbol of courage, the one who dared to look the most powerful man in the room in the eye and say, "You'll need a lawyer before you can call your mother." Social media erupted. News outlets ran non-stop coverage. TV anchors, attorneys, activists. They all wanted Elena to speak up, but she remained silent. No press conference, no statement. Only a single video quietly uploaded 3 days later was shot inside the old library of her university. Elena looked straight into the camera and said, "I was afraid." I stood still. But silence is no longer an option. If anyone out there feels invisible, I'm here. And I stepped forward. No background music, no polished lighting, just the truth, and 100 million views in 3 days. Max Kingston was suspended. The Mayfair Foundation issued a public apology. A wave of students began speaking out about previously buried incidents. Elena declined every interview. She chose instead to work with an organization providing legal aid to women facing harassment. Because for her, going viral wasn't the victory. Changing the system, that was the real answer. The 47-second clip spread like a tsunami. But what silenced America wasn't the act of pulling a dress. It was the moment that girl didn't break. No screaming, no retaliation. Just a look, direct, cold, and full of self-respect, like a blade slicing through the hollow shell of power Max once believed would protect him forever. On social media, the hashtag #Elena did not flinch flooded every platform. Then it evolved into I Stood Still Too, a space where thousands of women shared the moments they had once stayed silent, because they didn't know if anyone would believe them. I was touched during an international conference, but I laughed it off. Today I write because Elena didn't laugh. An A-list actress spoke about an audition at age 19. A renowned professor admitted, "We saw it, but we turned away." And then the unraveling began. Brands suspended partnerships with the Mayfair Foundation. Four public figures who had stood beside Max at the Gala posted apologies for not stopping him. Two models refused to walk in a fashion show because Max Kingston is in the front row. A journalist reposted an old photo, Max grinning, behind a girl crying on the backstage stairs. No one shielded him anymore. If Elena didn't fear the camera flash, then why should we fear the dark? A prominent TV host declared on a live broadcast. Elena said nothing. She only posted a single sentence against a plain white background: "I don't need admiration. I need the girls after me to not have to clutch their dresses in fear." Max Kingston was suspended indefinitely. The university board announced an independent investigation. The Mayfair Foundation issued a public apology and invited Elena to serve as honorary advisor for their Safe Night initiative. And at a student conference at Yale, the school Elena once dreamed of attending but hadn't scored high enough to enter, someone asked her, "If you could go back to that moment, would you do anything differently?" She didn't rush to answer. She looked down at her hand as if she could still feel the wrinkle in that old dress. Then she looked up, gave a quiet smile, her eyes unwavering. "I just wish I had lifted my head sooner." 3 months later, no more torn dresses, no more camera flashes aimed at humiliation. Elena stood at the podium of a university, a place that invited her as the youngest honorary speaker in its history. She didn't wear designer clothes, just a white shirt, her hair neatly tied up her face, nearly bare of makeup. She recounted everything, without embellishment, without avoidance, from the moment Max pulled her dress, the wave of laughter, to the pitying glances of those who thought themselves kind. I stood still. I thought that if no one stood up for me, maybe I was the one who was wrong. The entire auditorium held its breath, not because a victim was speaking, but because a symbol was turning bitter experience into a truth that could no longer be ignored. A male student asked, "Do you regret not slapping him right then and there?" Elena smiled, not cold, not bitter. Just the smile of someone who had made it through. "If I had slapped him, that video would have been used against me. But I stood still. And today, I stand here." That day, thousands shared Elena's speech. It didn't end with applause, but with a long silence, because no one wanted to break that moment. A few weeks later, Max stepped down from all positions in social organizations. No one forced him to. He just had nowhere left to hide. And Elena, she continued her work at the legal aid organization. Each week she supported girls like her, those still clutching their dresses, but now knowing someone would stand behind them. And if you still remember Elena's eyes in the moment her dress was pulled, then never forget, this silence can destroy a person. But the courage of one can awaken the world. Dear friend, if you're still here after everything Elena Monroe went through, then perhaps this is no longer just a story you watched. It's a journey that made you ask yourself, how many times have I stayed silent thinking no one would listen, even if I spoke? Maybe you too have been humiliated. Maybe you've stood tall in a crowded room and yet felt completely alone. Maybe you've clenched the hem of your dress, like Elena, not out of fear, but because it was the only piece of dignity you had left to hold on to. But Elena did what many cannot. She didn't scream, she didn't fight back. She simply stood her ground and let her silence speak louder than any shout ever could. And the world turned back to listen. The lesson here isn't in the flash of cameras or the number of likes or shares. It lies in this truth. When one woman dares to rise, She doesn't just save herself, she clears the way for hundreds of others to stand tall without shame. If you've ever felt overlooked, ever been pushed out of someone else's frame, remember this: you don't need power to change the world. You just need to step forward so no one else is ever forced to stay silent the way you once did. Share this story if it touched something buried inside you. And if you want to keep walking alongside stories that reach deep into the soul, like, comment, and subscribe to Toch Story, where we don't tell stories just to be watched, but to be felt, to be understood, and to spark change.